BDD. Sorry, I'm in a weird mood. So BDD is a subset of OCD in the DSM-5. For those who are curious, it used to be called a somatoform disorder. A somatoform disorder is where you have some sort of misconception about your own body or bodily functions. Perhaps you actually psychologically blind yourself, feel pain in a limb where there is no cause for that pain to exist. So it's sort of a mind over matter phenomenon where your psychological state causes some sort of weird sensation in your body. So anyway, that's not important. What's important is that it is a subset of OCD, and we're going to separate these two just so they're cleanly in two different boxes, so there's not too much confusion. So I didn't put this in the first video for that reason. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the diagnostic criteria according to the DSM-5, and if time allows, we'll look at a paper 4 to create a questionnaire that somehow links with the symptoms of BDD, or body dysmorphic disorder. So what is body dysmorphic disorder? It is a subcategory of OCD, as I've said about 3 times now, but the obsessions and compulsions are limited to thoughts and behaviors associated with one's appearance. So it's not about contamination, it's not about neutralizing bad thoughts, it's more limited to your physical appearance. Now, of course, your physical appearance is not just something that's outward, it's something that's also inward. You have an ideal sense of who you should look like and what you actually do look like, and that disconnect is what you obsess about constantly. It is called a hidden disorder, and this is because many of the people who have it actually do not seek professional help. There could be several reasons for this that we'll talk about in just a few moments. First, let's just jump into the diagnostic criteria for body dysmorphic disorder. I just want to simplify some of this stuff here, or to expand upon it. So like we said, it's a preoccupation with your appearance, most notably what your flaws or defects are in your appearance. Some of the common behaviors associated with this are mirror checking, excessive grooming, skin picking, reassurance seeking, or you could do something internal or mental, such as comparing your image with that of others. Other things may include something called camouflaging. This is where you try to hide your defects, usually through makeup, but it could also be done through some sort of clothing or some lighting or something of that sort. I think we live in a crazy selfie age where many of us have these apps we download where we camouflage things digitally. So perhaps we're all inducing some sort of light version of BDD through our habits with the selfie age, but that's a whole other discussion. The preoccupation causes some distress and may cause impairment socially and occupationally. This is typical of all disorders. And the last thing is it cannot be explained due to other phenomena. So, for example, many of you may have heard of anorexia or bulimia. These are both eating disorders. BDD is not an eating disorder. It's typically believed that eating disorders affect females more than males, and that's slowly changing because some people believe that males are less likely to report eating disorders due to the social awkwardness, or it doesn't match their social expectations of what men are supposed to be concerned about. However, the BDD phenomenon is more evenly distributed across genders, and there are some estimates that say 40% are male, but that's actually climbing higher to about 50% as more research is presented. So just again to reiterate what the typical behaviors are, mirror gazing is a huge one, excessive grooming, picking at the skin, and camouflaging perceived defects. There's a book written by a woman named Catherine A. Phillips, and you can see there's an MD next to her name, so we could trust her and cite her with some authority. She discovered, I don't know if this was her own analysis or some sort of meta-analysis, but she looked at what are the common features that people with BDD tend to focus on. And unsurprisingly, most of it has to do with the face, but there are some weight issues as well. So the highest ones were skin, 73%, followed by hair, weight, toes. I skipped nose. Nose and toes are about equal, and the abdomen. And if you want to see the full breakdown of that research, You can see it over here. I teach in China, so this might be ethnocentrically, biased in some way. It may not apply to all cultures, but one thing I know about young Chinese students is that the eyes is a great focus of their self-criticism because in Asian cultures you have either double eyelids or single eyelids, but eyes here is not too high. It's only about 20%. So it would be interesting for me to find out if this kind of chart would be significantly different in an Asian culture, but that's my own personal curiosity. But you could always talk about things on an evaluative paper as having sort of an ethnocentric bias, being that most of this research is done in the West, presumably. There is an article from the old syllabus that has been retired recently that dealt with BDD at the AS level. And the aim of it was to investigate the nature and function of mirror gazing in body dysmorphic disorder patients compared with a control group. So just in case you want some research to back up something that you're saying, if there is a paper 3 question asked about BDD, you have it available. I will say that they asked about this rather recently, so my guess is that it's probably not going to be asked in 2019, but it's always okay to be safe in these issues. And of course, we should be learning for the sake of learning, not for a test, of course. The people in the study were about evenly distributed, 52 to 55. They had to use, of course, a self-selecting sample because you're not going to just randomly find BDD people in the general population, especially when the prevalence rate is only about 2%. So, of course, that's self-selecting. The other people were just available to the researchers, so this is an opportunity sample. And I invite you to find this article on your own. I believe it is available. Doing a basic Google search of Veal and Riley 2001. It had to be available for many years due to the presence of it on the old syllabus. But I really wanted to talk about this mostly because I wanted to reinforce with my students how to evaluate self-reports and also how to create self-reports. So hopefully you remember some of this stuff from your AS year. Many things we used last year use self-reports. Even at the end of the Milgram study, they were asked to do self-reports. What's another one? Schachter Singer, Baron Cohen. So you've come across these things before, but just to remind you, one of the advantages of self-reports is that if it is like a closed-ended or a Likert scale or forced choice question, it's much easier to collate and collect and compare that data. And it is relatively easy to give to large numbers of participants. And if you have a questionnaire that is reliable and valid and other people want to use it, then other people could replicate your research rather easily. Of course, the disadvantage is that if it is closed-ended questions, it will not give many opportunities to have the participants explain the motivation behind their answers. Another thing is that closed-ended questions may not capture nuance. It may be too forced of a choice. And of course, you have to be careful about asking leading questions. So if you've seen like courtroom dramas, you could see an accusation of a lawyer leading the witness. So this happens all the time with especially political questionnaires. You could say, why is Mr. Johnson such a terrible president? Or why am I so amazing? These are leading questions, of course. The Veal and Riley study on mirror gazing is a good one to look at to reinforce the different types of questions that could be asked on a self-report survey or questionnaire because it has so many different subcategories. It has multiple choice, it has Likert scales, it has something called visual analog scales, it has a lot of different types of questions. I just kind of concentrated on a few of these areas. One of the important parts of this questionnaire was about the internal feelings people have while looking in the mirror. And I always like to give this questionnaire to students to see how they would compare to the two groups that are in the study. Are they closer to BDD or are they closer to control? My hypothesis would be they would be somewhere in the middle, mainly because when you're a teenager, when you're in high school, you're surrounded by your peers, you're constantly self-conscious about your appearance. And I'm sure some students who watch this video or read about BDD in the textbook might be self-diagnosing. And I say be careful about that because remember, you're young. Your biological imperative is probably to be with other people, to attract other people. So you might be closer to the BDD group than the control group from this study. People like me who are older, already married, is probably going to come down significantly. Okay. I know I implied that once you get married, you stop caring about your appearance, and unfortunately, there is a small degree of truth for that, at least for me. I got bigger fish to fry than to worry about that pimple on my nose. So earlier we said that people with body dysmorphic disorder tend not to share it very easily, and they don't seek professional help very easily. And I asked students to hypothesize why this might be, or just guess why this is the situation. And one thing I would guess is that maybe BDD is not a well-known phenomenon. Unlike other disorders like schizophrenia or depression or OCD in general, people don't have much of a context, you don't see people with BDD very often in film or television. At least I haven't. So maybe that's changing because of all the sort of like Dr. Phil type stuff that's on TV. But many people, at least 20 years ago, would not come forward about BDD. But the other reason, at least cited by Veal and Riley here, is that people who are suffering from this condition think that they will be viewed as either vain or narcissistic. And there's a sort of embarrassment that goes along with that. Okay, I feel like these slides are not in the right order, but just bear with me here. More feedback from the Veal and Riley study. They asked the participants to identify what type of reflective surfaces they would look at. And the people in the BDD group listed a whole panoply of different types of reflective surfaces that they would constantly use as mirrors. Now, some of these are not ideal. So, for example, if you look at a car bumper, a chrome car bumper, that's almost like a concave mirror. It's going to actually distort your face and perhaps make things even worse. So I don't think it's a good idea for people with BDD to use surfaces that are not flat. However, they discovered that they might purposely use mirrors that are obscured or dirty. They found that there were beliefs that some mirrors were safe and some mirrors were unsafe or bad. And they have mirrors they trust and mirrors that they would completely avoid. So it's a very complex choice of different types of mirror avoidance or mirror use that they have. Sometimes they like dirty mirrors. Sometimes they like obscured mirrors. Sometimes they like to obscure a part of their body as they look. So, for example, if their focal point is their nose, they might purposely block out their nose. So it's, to each his own. Very individual differences between how people engage with mirrors. Several people with body dysmorphic disorder will take it as far as getting cosmetic surgery to fix their perceived defects. But will this work? Well, I just said perceived defects. So the short answer is no. It's likely not going to work. And the reason for this is, as Veal and Riley point out in their article about mirror gazing, is the ideal image is internal. And ideals could really never be matched. You have an ideal self and you have an actual self. And no matter how much surgery you do, it's never going to quite match. So your mental image of yourself could be morphic. You could actually keep changing it to a higher ideal. And so you see people who are addicted to plastic surgery and chipping away, literally chipping away at their bone until they almost look like an alien. You see people who take selfies, they like to point the camera above their face to make their chin more pointed, but their chin actually isn't that pointed, so they'll eventually actually get surgery to make their chin almost look like the end of a sunflower seed. And it becomes quite disturbing if that keeps getting chipped away into more fine of a point. Okay, so that's really most of what I wanted to say about body dysmorphic disorder. You'll notice that there's no treatments mentioned in here, and that's because the treatments recommended for BDD are actually the same treatments we discussed in the previous video on OCD in general. So, for example, exposure and response prevention would be something that would be recommended. So, that being said, let's just leave off with something slightly different than what we've done so far in the videos, and that is to talk about paper 4. I really haven't touched paper 4 very much. It's somewhat new to me. We used to have a 3-hour exam. Now we have 90-minute exams, which is much better for the stamina. So there's no excuse that you just ran out of stamina during this test, as there used to be. But paper 4 is officially called an application question. So it's taking your knowledge and putting it to use. And I just want to show you this question that was asked last year. Design a study using a questionnaire to investigate the most common body dysmorphic disorder behaviors. There are two elements here that you have to balance. One, it's a study, but two, it's using a questionnaire. I've had students do questions like this in the classroom, and I've discovered that they spend so much time building up an IV or DV and conditions of the experiment that they forget to even give any details about the questionnaire. When you're giving a questionnaire, make sure you are perhaps giving some quotes of some real questions on that questionnaire, maybe one or two quotes. And please make sure you indicate how that data is collected. Is it a rating scale? Is it a Likert scale? Is it a drop choice? Is it multiple choice? Is it qualitative? Is it a combination of these things? Is it a visual analog scale? Yada, yada, yada. Use the jargon. And I'm going to recommend when you do a 10-point application question that you have at least like 8 to 10 pieces of jargon. Independent groups, repeated measures, IV, DV, Likert scale. This is the time to show off how you can not just drop jargon, but use it in a context. Don't just drop jargon for the sake of dropping it. Actually understand what you're saying.